Playing against a rush can be especially stressful for newer players, but in general it's easy to get overwhelmed. Most factions can rush, but against certain factions you're almost guaranteed to see rush-style builds. One such faction, of course, is Warriors of Chaos. This video, today I'm playing High Elves, my patron here, Rider of Rohan. You guys have seen on the channel before. Great guy. Big thanks to him for his support. He's playing Warriors of Chaos. He's a High Elf main, but one good way to learn, like especially if you have a matchup you find tough, is to kind of play it from the other side and learn the tips and trade of the counter. So he's playing Warriors of Chaos here to better his own High Elves, and I'm playing in the role as the High Elves. And yeah, one thing quickly before we get started here is just about the builds. Generally, when you're playing against rush factions, it's a good idea to take units that you don't have to protect. Right? Like, I still want ranged units, which is why for High Elves, Lothar and Seaguard are an awesome pick. They have spears that can defend themselves from a number of threats. I mean, still, you don't want them in melee combat, especially against, like, lower tier infantry or something like Forsaken, but they can generally handle themselves. I don't need to allocate a lot of resources to protect them. Same thing with these spearmen, obviously. For the most part, they will get mulched by infantry, but it'll at least take them a while to die. White Lions are arguably the most vulnerable unit of my infantry. So we've got them protected behind the spears, but again, just good against a multitude of threats versus Chaos. We've got Tyrion and a Death Mage. Then 4 Reavers. I will say this build is pretty light on mass, and just kind of from a threat analysis standpoint, if you guys remember my last tactics video I did about target priority here, looking at Rider of Rohan's army. So if we, again, just kind of slow things down here a little bit and analyze, he's got Archaon, the Everchosen, on horseback, a Gore-Beast Chariot, 2 heroes on Manticores, one of them Exalted Hero and a Metal Sorcerer. He's got some Chaos Warriors, Mirror Guard, and Marauders, and then this force here currently hidden in the woods, but we've got some Hounds and Horsemen and Horse Masters. So from a threat analysis standpoint, these Gore-Beast Chariots, and, well, primarily, obviously, Archaon's a huge problem. Don't really have the greatest tools for dealing with him, so I'm going to deprioritize him and instead focus on the Manticores, who are also major threats. The Gore-Beast is something that's definitely a serious threat, not as much as these 2 monsters, but it's something I need to manage, and I don't have that much mass to manage it. So, to that effect, I'm going to have to be really careful with my Illyrian Reavers, try and preserve them as they're, my only mass here to try and pin those chariots in, or, like, same thing with the Manticores, right? So I do spot this Vanguard force here, and I'm going to immediately pull away. One thing when you're playing against Rush is if you can find ways to get quick, decisive engagements against the opponent that's rushing you, kind of in a counter-rush situation, and quickly break a couple of units to try and even the scales, that is very beneficial. So here I pull these Hounds out of the woods so they don't get the benefit of their Strider, and just countercharge them quick with the Reavers. That 40 charge bonus, we should be able to break them quickly and pull away. Definitely take some losses, but Archaon and the Gore-Beast Chariots moving in. Infantry engagement also getting underway. I'm going to try and manage my infantry so that I'm not over-blobbing. Like here, this is not good, blobbing in these White Lions right behind these Spearmen, but I do realize that. I'm actually going to pull them back. These White Lions move up through the Spearmen, kind of, do a nice little hot swap there. These White Lions get a weird little rear charge on these Marauders, which is not great. They're now going to get inundated by Chaos Warriors there, but the line's forming nonetheless. You can see how I'm also just keeping these Reavers here in the back, and like this engagement here, I did lose a significant number of Reavers, but we beat down 2 Hounds, and I do think they're going to flee off the side here. I don't think they're going to be able to recover their leadership, so that's pretty decisive. Meanwhile, on the front line, Manticore's dropping down, and I'm focusing him with the Lothar and Seaguard. You're going to see some hot fire raining down, piercing bolts of burning from Archaon, nuking my Lothar and Seaguard there. But yeah, definitely focusing the Manticores with both Spirit Leech from my Deathcaster and with the Lothar and Seaguard there. Has already done a lot of damage to him. Standard die has been popped from Archaon though, and this flank here, right flank for Chaos, my left, breaking pretty heavily. You can see I'm starting to deploy my Reaver reserves. One, to go push away these Horsemen and Horse Masters, see if we can't get a charge in there, maybe do some damage. Another one still chilling back for the time being. Same thing with these White Lions, like just kind of keeping them in reserve. Don't really need to commit them necessarily. My Lothar and Seaguard should probably be pulled back, and, it'd be great for them to be screening for the Lothar and Seaguard right now, so we're going to push them, try and do so. I have kind of lost out pretty hard on this left, and I'm getting behind on the balance of power a little bit, but Foot Tyrion here, who has only Heart of Avalorn, relatively cheap, can just kind of stand and fight for a while. This is potentially going to be a very dangerous situation for him to be in. But I'm relying on that Heart of Avalorn a little bit there, which granted is not the safest play, but again, Reaver reserves deployed in the front line to try and stem the tide, especially able to pin these Gorbeast chariots in. And yeah, we just about finished off the Exalted Hero. The Lothern Seaguard do have good leadership, and because I'm kind of contesting this mobile engagement, Rider of Rohan can't chase my routing units off the field, which is very important. Why, if you suspect you're going to be playing against a rush, I like to have a lot of counter kind of light cavalry engagement stuff, or just counter mobility in general, to try and make sure that your units aren't getting chased off. But like here, got quite a few rallying troops getting back in the fight, a few more Reavers getting terrified away, but we managed to do a pretty solid amount of damage to the Gorbeast chariots as well in this fight. Tyrion still just getting pummeled by Archaon over here by himself. Did get his Heart of Avalorn proc, but he's getting dangerously low. I am going to need to come bail him out at this point, so we're going to get some Reavers rushing over and try and rear charge those Chaos Marauders. Tyrion getting pretty good RNG here. This is a very dangerous situation. You can see he actually blocks the attack of Archaon there, but if he were to take like a couple successive attacks from Archaon, he could die very quickly, so definitely want to try and bail him out of that situation as quickly as possible. You can see we do manage to get a nice surround with the Reavers and Spearmen. Rider Rohan got a Burning Head in response, but it did break those Marauders, so I should be able to screen Tyrion out. Keep him alive, focusing on the next Manticore with the few Lothern Seaguard I have. Those reserve White Lions came up and around, got a nice rear charge on these Mirror Guard. So they're now kind of helping hold this center pocket together. We're just keeping these infantry bogged down as much as possible while managing the mobile threats. Tyrion once again, though, gets caught out. Manticore gets up and around, gets a nice rear charge, breaking some of those screening troops there. And so the Illyrian Reavers coming back around one more time. Archers firing in. Tyrion actually going to turn around, and yeah, the charge of the Reavers, I think, actually just killed that Manticore there. Might have been the arrows from the Lothern Seaguard. It's hard to say. Manticores don't have a ton of armor, and the Reavers actually will do some pretty solid damage on the charge, but Tyrion does actually break here. He's got 167 HP, so that's potentially very, very bad. I'm not 100% sure if he'll come back, but I'm going to keep forces screening Archaon as much as possible. There's a Spirit Leech there, like we've got these White Lions kind of screening Tyrion out. Keep some other forces in the back. I see one thing a lot of newer players, like, they feel like they have to always commit all of their troops, and especially with cavalry, like in the early phases of the battle, kind of overcommitting, whereas like in this battle here, just kind of keeping them in reserve and deploying them successively, and even now, like, having these units kind of, you know, layered. Like, I'm just going to keep a lot of these Reavers around, these Spearmen also just kind of chilling back. There's no reason necessarily to overblob right now. Really should, like, move these Spearmen over to have them in layers with the Lothern Seaguard, but we just about used up all our ammunition at this point. Both the Manticores are gone, and the Gorbeast Chariot's functionally gone, so all I've got left to deal with is Archaon. My Deathcaster did take a pummeling from the Manticores early on, but we managed to keep her safe as well, so another Spirit Leech or two should finish the job. Balance of power still very close at this point, but I'm pretty confident I've got this game tucked away here. Lothern Seaguard dropping a few more shots. Just, you know, trying to get at Archaon. There is the Spirit Leech, and the constant bane of Archaon, Spirit Leech, ends up, yeah, finishing the battle. So very well played to Rider Rohan. I thought for a minute there he had me when my left flank collapsed. It was a little bit faster than what I was expecting, but honestly, getting that initial early engagement to break the Hounds to allow my Reavers to operate more freely was pretty decisive, I think. I will say most of the time with High Elves you're not going to have more units than your opponent, so there is that to consider in this particular replay. But it's even more important than if your opponent outnumbers you to try and get those quick breaks and, you know, even the scales out a little bit. But I definitely would say that was, might seem like a relatively small engagement between two kind of lower value units, but it ends up proving pretty decisive. So yeah, definitely maintaining a mobility advantage, and obviously if you're playing somebody like Dwarfs, it's not really part of your game plan, right? Having counter mobility assets, but more just taking up a defensive position. And I mean, like, Slayer's obviously very important for Dwarfs, and they're kind of your counter mobility, right? But anyway, getting a little bit off track here. In terms of the battle breakdown, Tyrion got some great value, got absolutely pummeled by Archaon, who himself got some seriously inflated value, but pretty legit value as well. Yeah, Archaon with some awesome burning heads there as well, 104 kills. Archaon's definitely very good in this matchup. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about the build. I had some points for Ryder Rohan about that I'll share with you guys as well. Yeah, the Death Mage also getting some nice value, just Spirit Leeching high-value targets. I was also casting, I didn't catch it quite there in the replay. You guys might have seen it on the tooltip somewhere. But using the aspect of Dread Knight to give Tyrion immune to psychology, basically, right? Because units which have terror cannot be terror routed. An aspect of Dread Knight gives terror, so I think I might have actually terrified the Gorby's Chariot at one point as well. Tyrion, or with Tyrion or something. But anyway, Spearmen, yeah, they're kind of just here to die slowly. The White Lions also hopefully will do a little bit of damage in return. One of them just about pays for themselves, but mostly it's the Lothern Sea Guard that are kind of the heroes of the day here, taking down the Manticores and just surviving. Love Lothern Sea Guard. They're definitely one of the best units on the High Elf roster for sure. Yeah, Reaver's also generating some pretty good value, but tactically super critical in helping kind of stem the tide there and keeping myself from getting overwhelmed. And really, that like timely deployment of tactical reserves is the way to keep yourself from getting completely overwhelmed. Then again, it kind of does rely on that numbers game, right? For the rest of Ryder Rohan's army here. Yeah, it's pretty solid value all around for the most part, like especially like Mirror Guard, Chaos Warriors, really nice in this matchup. Chaos Warriors even will trade decently against stuff like, Silver Guard, just all around awesome in this matchup. High Elves' general lack of armor piercing means this cheaper armored infantry is definitely very solid here. Gorby's Chariot, likewise, same reason. High Elves generally lack AP, so the Gorby's Chariot, awesome here. Definitely got some good value. The Hounds were definitely a rough point, and honestly, again, maybe the deciding factor in the game. But from a build perspective, I would say Ryder Rohan, you would probably want to just switch up this hero core a little bit. Like, I don't think you need a secondary caster if you have Archaon. You're not going to get that much Winds of Magic anyway, because he doesn't have any regeneration abilities, right? And I don't remember exactly what kit he had, but Piercing Bolts of Burning is pretty decent to bring, but also a lot of the expensive High Elf stuff has fire resistance, so I would maybe leave it at home. Cascading Fire Cloak, though, is pretty nice. Burning Head's basically always good. High Elf Infantry generally doesn't have fire resistance. But anyway, yeah, the Exalted here on the Manticore, I'm just curious to kind of compare cost here if you take him completely with nothing versus the Sorcerer. No, the Sorcerer is actually a little bit more expensive, and so, yeah, like cutting the spells from that guy and cutting him down to another Exalted Manticore would save you a little bit of funds, allow you to just bring a couple more units. Maybe even, like the Chaos Warriors did very well there. Maybe you also, cut them and go wider with more Marauder Infantry, maybe mix in a couple Great Weapons or something. The thing about it is that, yeah, being outnumbered when you're against High Elves is potentially a problem, just because generally the best way to deal with them is to outnumber them. Of course, you could also cut the two Exalted Manticores down to just Feral Manticores, and that will also save you some funds. So you could do, yeah, like Mirror Guard, a couple of Chaos Warriors. In terms of items, Archaon can take his Immune to Psychology item here. High Elves don't actually have that much terror, so I don't know if I would actually bring it in this matchup. Slayer of Kings is very strong, but it's also pretty expensive, so I might, considering we're kind of min-maxing on cost here, against High Elves, I might leave that back. The Horse Masters are also a pretty nice touch, and generally if I'm running 2 Hound packs, I'll go 1 Poison, 1 Not. Again, just to kind of cost optimize a little bit. I know I'm getting way off track. This video's supposed to be about managing rush, but just a little bit of kind of post-battle analysis. I know some of you guys are big fans of this. And for Ryder Rohan's perspective as well, as my patron, I obviously have a duty to inform him and coach him. That's kind of one of the things he's paying me for, besides the awesome content, of course. But anyway, yeah, you could go for a number of different directions here. Just from kind of cost optimizing the 2 Manticores, you're able to bring some more Horsemen. I would definitely say more mobile threats is probably good here. This infantry force is generally pretty okay. I mean, it is lacking a little bit in elite stopping power. Something like Sword Masters, I mean, at that point, maybe you do want to actually bring the Piercing Bolts of Burning, and then, yeah, I guess we have enough for, like, 1 more Hound, or you could take another Marauder, maybe a Great Weapon. These guys trade pretty good against Silverguard, don't quite have enough, so, yeah, maybe just another 4 Hound that's fine like that. But, yeah, from other factions' perspectives, like, again, if you're going up against a Rush faction, let's say just as an example, I'm playing Empire, and I'm playing against the Rush of Rush factions, Vampire counts, literally no ranged unit. So, or even like Beastman is a similar situation. Like, you end up coming up with different builds because of some specific differences, but as a general rule, against both of these factions, I don't like to take artillery, stationary artillery, like, these traditional crude artillery pieces. And I also don't like to take infantry skirmishers for the most part. There's some exceptions, like, again, Lothern Sea Guard for the High Elves, Free Company Militia for the Empire also. They're decent in melee. They're not amazing, but they're okay. They'll certainly beat something like zombies. And they've got a decent amount of firepower, 90 unit models as well. I mean, their leadership's not amazing, but they're all right. But generally, I would say I prefer to go with mobile skirmishers with pretty much any faction, right? So in this case, that would be some Pistoliers. Maybe you even bring some wagons as well, because wagons won't bleed models as easily, although they are a little bit slower, harder to protect, and of course more expensive. There's also other exceptions too, like infantry skirmishers generally that shoot 360 are somewhat safer, although obviously the ones with poison are safer than the ones that are not, so like with High Elves here. Because High Elves have pretty good mobility in and of themselves, you can often protect, but if you're really, like against Bretonnia for example, where you're going to be facing an overwhelming cav rush, most likely, and it's just hard for you to stop that many cav bodies, rather than taking the Glade Guards, you may opt for Deepwood Scouts or Way Watchers. They're somewhat more mobile, but even then can sometimes be hard to protect. Maybe it's arguably safer to just take only Glade Riders, maybe Hawk Riders as well. Who knows? I don't play High Elves a ton these days, but you guys who do, you'll have to let me know down in the comments below what you think about that. But like Dark Elves, again, same thing. Like, I wouldn't take Dark Shards, maybe Corsairs, but even then, I don't totally love Corsairs against these very high mobility factions, or very concentrated rush factions. And I guess another point too about managing rush, and this is getting a little off topic, a little rambly, but I know some of you guys love that. Like, there are different types of rush, of course, as well, right? Like Bretonnia, for example, very much like a heavy cavalry rush. Whereas Warriors of Chaos and Beastmen and potentially Norska is going to be more of like a monsters plus swarm of like light cavalry and dogs and stuff, with some decent infantry as well. So there's different types of rush too, and almost all factions, even dwarfs to a degree, in some situations can rush. So it's always good to know how to counteract that. But the biggest thing in terms of mindset is just stay calm, try and manage those threats. Think about target priority. What can you deal? What do you need to deal damage to, and what do you have the ability to deal damage to, and kind of go from there. So thanks for that, guys. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you like this sort of content, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, all that jazz. Yeah, we'll see you next time.